Welcome to Things You Don't Know. This is a very important episode. So let's just start back. Let's rewind the clock a bit. January 6, 2021. A joint session of Congress convened to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election. Outside, a mob gathered, egged on by speeches, social media rhetoric, and a belief that democracy had failed them. By afternoon, Capitol Police were overrun. 5 people died. Over 140 officers were injured. The Capitol, a global symbol of democracy, was desecrated. Specifically, what I'm talking about is broken windows and doors. Rioters smashed windows and forced open doors to gain access to restricted areas. Vandalism. Walls, furniture, and offices were defaced with graffiti, including slogans like "Murder the Media" and Trump-related messages. Looting and theft. Government property was stolen. Rioters smeared human feces. Yeah, that's poop. Shit, you know? On walls and urinated in hallways.
But who were these people? Were they just fringe extremists, or were they everyday Americans who felt unheard, forgotten, or even radicalized?
More than 1,300 individuals have since been charged. Among them, QAnon believers, Proud Boys, and Oath Keepers.
Some wore tactical gear, others brought zip ties. They weren't just shouting, they were prepared to act.
A 2021 report by the University of Chicago found that most weren't really part of organized militias. They had no specific ties to extremist groups, but many came from counties where Trump had won big. They weren't poor. Many were middle class, even upper middle class.
It wasn't about poverty, it was about perceived powerlessness, a fear of losing cultural dominance.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room, so to speak. President Donald J. Trump. His speech in the morning of January 6 ended with the words, "If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. Go forth, I will go with you."
Oh, but his influence goes way back. Trump built his brand on grievance, from questioning Barack Obama's birth certificate, from calling the press the enemy of the people. He normalized distrust in institutions. A great example is Fox News. Though it is called Fox News, it is an entertainment channel. That's their own words. If one checks the Fox website under terms of use, you will find in the first sentence of the second paragraph the statement that Fox News is licensed as an entertainment platform. Nowhere in the terms of use document does it mention actual news as a service provided. In the last 4 years, they have become apologists and propagandists for Mr. Trump, who is not a conservative. The organization is notorious for editing and splicing videos to tell a different story than their favorite targets actually conveyed.
Just want to amplify a couple of things. Chandler, you said Trump is not a conservative. What we mean by that is he is not following the conservative principles. Check it out. Don't take my word for it. He is not. And when we say editing and splicing videos to tell a different story, okay, a great example. I don't know if you saw this one or not, They were filming a congressional hearing, and one of the people that disagreed with the chairman of the committee held up two fingers, an index finger and his middle finger. Okay. He was indicating two, and what they showed was an edited picture that showed this person with their middle finger up.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was caught by somebody else there, and they showed the whole picture, and it really ticked them off. But anyhow, we need to look at Trump's background. A Queens born real estate mogul, mentored by Roy Cohen, the same ruthless fixer who once advised Senator McCarthy. Remember him from history? Now, Trump learned early how to weaponize publicity, dodge accountability, and turn scandal into spectacle. He did not work for money. Trump's daddy, his papa, Fred, gave him $1 million to get a start in Manhattan. Yeah, and I can and then Chandler, over time, dear Daddy Fred gave him $413 million. Did your daddy give you that?
No, he would not. My dad would tell me to start from the beginning and work my way up by myself.
Oh, yeah, like a normal good American citizen. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that's we kind of do that in this household.
There you go.
But the thing is, when he actually did work, his track record was not very good. Under Donald Trump's leadership, six. Now count them. Think about that. Six companies, all ties to his empire, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy between 1991 and 2009. Trump Taj Mahal, 1991, opened in 1990 in Atlantic City. Bankruptcy followed due to unsustainable $1 million construction debt amid a recession.
Yeah, another company was the Trump Castle Hotel and Casino. This was in 1992. That was another Atlantic City property, unable to service its debt.
A third one was Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino in 1992, also filed in 1992, part of the Atlantic City casino collapse. A fourth one was Plaza Hotel, Manhattan, 1992. New York property, over $550 million in debt. Trump gave up a large stake to avoid default. A fifth one, Trump Hotels, Casinos, and Resorts. 2004, holding company for multiple casinos, filed to restructure about $1.8 billion in debt. Trump Entertainment Resorts, 2009, a successor to the holding company, filed after recession hit declines, owning approximately $1.7 billion.
There were other notable failures that weren't bankruptcies, not Chapter 11 bankruptcies. So, although not bankruptcies, several Trump branded businesses failed and closed, like the Trump Shuttle, that's an airline. It was acquired in 1989. It defaulted by 1990 and ceased operations in 1992. Here's another one, just a joyous thing here. How many students got screwed with this? Trump University is another one. Can you imagine how many students got ripped off for their money? There was a landslide of lawsuits, and they were forced to close by 2011 because of those lawsuits. The reason they had all those lawsuits was what? They weren't getting what they had paid for.
Exactly. They weren't getting their money's worth.
The students weren't getting anything for it. Another one of these companies, Trump Mortgage, Trump Vodka, Trump Steaks, GoTrump.com, and Trump Magazine. And all of those shut down within a few years after they started. Isn't that a great promotion for somebody to handle the nation's economy? Huh.
And notice they all had one thing in common.
Trump.
Absolutely. Oh, and let's not forget Steve Bannon, the ideologue behind the populist messaging. He once said, Lenin wanted to destroy the state, and that's my goal too. I want to bring everything crashing down.
Isn't that wonderful? Have somebody that close to the seat of power in the United States who says they want to destroy the state? And folks, if you don't remember, Lenin, communist, Russia, failed government, screwed economy. So here we have Bannon, Giuliani, Roger Stone. These weren't random names. These were insiders, each with decades of experience in manipulation, propaganda, or political theater.
And yet, none of them stormed the building. They didn't carry flags. They didn't smash windows. But their words and tactics sure did light that match.
Yeah, let's talk platforms, social media, especially Parler, Grab, Facebook groups, and Telegram channels, and Twitter. These were used to plan the insurrection in plain sight of the public.
There was even a PowerPoint presentation circulating among Trump allies, posing ways to stop certification. It outlined martial law scenarios. Now, that wasn't fiction, that was in the White House.
They were proposing ways to stop certification. Proposing. The Department of Justice had hinted at more behind the scenes organizing. The Willard Hotel Command Center is now infamous. This is where Trump allies allegedly coordinated responses with right-wing groups.
So, was this just a spontaneous riot, or was it a dry run for something more calculated?
Okay, let's zoom out for a minute. The U.S. does have a long history of insurrectionist thinking, like the Whiskey Rebellion. That was in 1791. And even then, they didn't storm the Capitol. The Civil War in 1861. Okay. They didn't storm the Capitol either, although they would have if it had been possible for them to do. But that was the Civil War. It was declared, it was in the open. How about the Oklahoma City bombing? So there are some predecessors to this kind of activity, not the ones I would like to add to my credits.
Me either. And it's always the same echo, a belief that the government no longer represents real America.
January 6th was uniquely modern. It was fueled by misinformation, digital echo chambers, and populist demagoguery. But it wasn't new.
And what happens when a large segment of the population believes that elections are rigged, courts are biased, and only force can reclaim the nation?
Yeah, good question. So Congress formed the January 6th committee. Over 1,000 interviews, subpoenas, criminal referrals. Yet some people just ignore all that. Some call the rioters patriots? Really? Others call them traitors.
Trump seems to have won the 2024 election, even under multiple indictments, including one for January 6th. Some supporters wear January 6th prison sentences as badges of honor. Please.
Meanwhile, many Capitol police officers remained traumatized. Democracy is shaken, not shattered. But how many more tremors can it take?
So, what exactly was January 6th? A failed coup? A protest gone wrong? A wake-up call?
Or a warning shot.
Yeah, but what we do know is that democracy is not self-sustaining. It's fragile and it demands vigilance, not just in Washington, but in living rooms, news feeds, and dinner tables. And remember, history isn't just what we inherit, it's also what we decide to build.
As of mid 2025, Donald Trump is back in the White House as the 47th President of the United States, having won the 2024 election. One of the most controversial early moves of this new Trump administration has been his sweeping use of the presidential pardon power in relation to January 6, 2021 Capitol Insurrection. On January 20th, 2025, the very day of his inauguration, President Trump issued broad clemency for nearly all individuals convicted or charged in connection with the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Approximately 1,500 people had their legal consequences wiped away. This included not only nonviolent offenders, but also many violent rioters and militant leaders who had been convicted of serious crimes, such as assaulting police or seditious conspiracy to stop the transfer of power. For example, Oath Keepers founder Stuart Rhodes and Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio, who had received lengthy prison sentences for organizing attacks on the Capitol, were released early from prison through Trump's actions. Several news agencies report that. In Trump's clemency order, a handful of prominent figures like Rhodes and Tarrio had their sentences commuted, like that means ended early, rather than fully pardoned. But all other January 6 offenders received full unconditional pardons under a blanket proclamation.
Reaction to these mass pardons was swift and polarized. Law enforcement organizations expressed outrage and dismay, arguing that excusing those who violently assaulted police officers undermines accountability. The head of Washington, D.C.'s police union warned when there is no price to pay for violence against law enforcement, it sends a message that politics matter more than our first responders. Legal experts and democracy advocates likewise condemned Trump's January 6 clemencies as a misuse of the president's clemency power that effectively rewards anti-democratic violence. They noted that such an action is unprecedented in U.S. history. Never before has a president pardoned individuals who attack the Constitution or a transfer of power itself. Analysts also worry that pardoning the Capitol rioters could embolden extremist groups and legitimize political violence by sending the signal that those who commit crimes in allegiance to Trump would not face punishment. Indeed, he had long referred to the January 6 defendants as political prisoners and great patriots. And by overturning their convictions, he validated that narrative.
This sounds like something that would happen in, quote, a banana republic, not the United States. For his part, Trump defended the pardons as an act of justice. In an official proclamation, he characterized the prosecutions of the January 6 participants as a grave national injustice and claimed that freeing them was the start of a process of national reconciliation. This framing essentially recast convicted insurrectionists as victims of political bias, aligning with Trump's view that the January 6 crowd had been treated unfairly. Trump's swift clemency for these followers is consistent with his pattern of protecting loyalists. During his first term, he also intervened in cases to benefit political allies and supporters. For example, pardoning associates convicted in the Russia investigation and other scandals. Remember how they meddled in the election, da da da, and how that still continues with China and TikTok and some other things like that. Just don't forget those things, folks. However, using the pardon power to forgive an attack on Congress itself crossed a new line, prompting bipartisan criticism. Even some Republicans who initially condemned the Capitol assault have since defended Trump's pardon authority, although others privately expressed concern that such blanket pardons endorse the very attack on democracy they once denounced.
Should Trump attempt to self-pardon now, for instance, to shield himself from federal prosecutions related to his retention of classified documents or his efforts to overturn the 2020 election? It would almost certainly trigger a historic legal battle. The Department of Justice under President Biden previously signaled that a self-pardon would not automatically be honored. It could be challenged as invalid, forcing the courts, potentially the Supreme Court, to decide for the very first time whether a president's pardon power extends to themselves. It's also important to note that presidential pardons cover only federal offenses. Trump cannot pardon state crimes, so ongoing state level prosecutions, such as in New York or Georgia, would be unaffected. In summary, Trump has refrained from pardoning himself so far, and the legality of doing so remains an open question. No U.S. president has issued a self-pardon, so if he tried, it would pose a major constitutional test with unknown outcomes.
Beyond the immediate issues of pardons, Trump's overall political rise, rhetoric, and behavior in office have drawn extensive comparisons to authoritarian regimes. Commentators and scholars have noted striking similarities between Trump's tactics and those employed by authoritarian leaders such as Adolf Hitler, especially in the early stages of their rule. To be clear, these comparisons do not suggest Trump has carried out the same crimes as Hitler. Rather, experts point out that Trump's style of politics, his propaganda methods, demagoguery, and undermining of democratic norms fits a pattern seen in modern history's authoritarian movements. In the aftermath of January 6, 2021, many observers explicitly invoked lessons from the 1930s Europe as a cautionary tale, warning that the United States must not ignore the echoes of an authoritarian playbook unfolding in our own democracy. Most famously, the Washington Post talked about that. Below, or we will outline several key tactics and patterns where historians and analysts have drawn parallels between Trump and authoritarian leaders like Hitler. Let's start with propaganda and the big lie. Now, a hallmark of authoritarian propaganda is the big lie, a massive falsehood repeated incessantly until it takes on the ring of truth. Now, Adolf Hitler himself described this concept in Mein Kampf, observing that the public will more readily believe a colossal lie than a small one, because most people would not believe that others could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. Now, Donald Trump's politics have been dominated by a similar use of brazen falsehoods. As president, Trump made over 30,000 false or misleading claims in his first 4 years. That's an astonishing scale of disinformation. Perhaps the most egregious was the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen from him due to widespread fraud. This baseless claim, which Trump and his allies relentlessly promoted, became a rallying cry for his movement, despite being debunked by courts and officials. Historians note that Trump's insistence on a stolen election closely mirrors the big lie tactic pioneered by the Nazis. By convincing millions of Americans that a legitimate election result was a fraud, Trump created an alternate reality for his followers. This technique of saturating the public with disinformation and conspiracy theories is a classic authoritarian strategy to warp public perception and sow mistrust in independent media or any source of truth that contradicts the leader. In Trump's case, his propaganda machine was bolstered by a partisan media ecosystem and social media amplification. But the underlying approach, which is repeat a lie often enough and it becomes truth, is as old as Hitler's Germany. Another tactic, scapegoating and demonization of enemies. This is a process identifying scapegoats for the nation's problems. That's a very common tool for demagogues. Hitler infamously blamed Jews, along with communists and other minorities, for Germany's defeat in World War I and its economic turmoil, making them the scapegoat for all of society's ills. This created a unifying hatred that he exploited to gain power. Similarly, from the very start of his political career, Trump has scapegoated immigrants and other marginalized groups as threats to real Americans. One of those marginalized groups happened to be African Americans. Interesting, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, he launched his 2015 campaign by demonizing Mexican immigrants as criminals and rapists. And as president, he frequently portrayed refugees and Muslim immigrants as dangerous invaders. This rhetoric decomplexifies the world, as one historian noted. Instead of grappling with abstract problems, it pins blame on a specific group of others who can be vilified for everything that's wrong. Trump's speeches and tweets often single out targets for public anger: undocumented immigrants, inner city African Americans, Chinese officials, Muslim refugees, etc., even to the point of saying they were eating people's animals and stuff. Remember that? Yeah. He's even used dehumanizing language reminiscent of the 20th century fascists. For instance, Trump has referred to immigrants as poisoning the blood of our country, and he labeled his political opponents vermin in a diatribe late in 2023. Such language echoes the Nazi propaganda, which routinely described Jews and other enemies as vermin or poison. By scapegoating minority groups and dissenters, Trump invokes a classic authoritarian narrative that the nation's purity and greatness are being undermined by corrupt, alien elements, and only he can purge these threats. This tactic not only stokes fear and anger among followers, but also is used as a justification of harsh measures: travel bans, crackdowns, mass deportations, etc. And I think, Chandler, you know something about some deportations. Yes?
Yes, I do know a little bit about deportations. I know someone who's been here for 30 years and she's from Venezuela. She's done nothing wrong. She's really nice. She's a good person. And she has just recently had to be deported back to Venezuela. And, she had done nothing wrong. I think that's a shame. The only thing that she didn't have, she was just here illegally. But other than that, she was basically the model citizen.
Yeah, it is a real shame. So can you say something about some other things like undermining democratic institutions and norms?
Authoritarian leaders often come to power through legal means and then proceed to erode the institutional checks that constrain their authority. During his time in office, Trump repeatedly attacked or attempted to subvert key democratic institutions, from the free press and the courts to law enforcement at the electoral system itself. He has declared the media the enemy of the people, intimidating news outlets and encouraging his followers to distrust any journalism critical of him. He has defied court orders and delegitimized judges, often disparaging judges who rule against him as biased or illegitimate. Notably, even in 2023-25, Trump and some allies suggested that judges should have no power to check the president. One senator asserted that judges are not allowed to control the executive's power, reflecting the will to free Trump from judicial oversight. Trump's first impeachment in 2019 and second impeachment in 2021 both stand from alleged abuses of power and attacks on democratic processes, from pressuring a foreign country to help his reelection to inciting a mob against Congress. After losing the 2020 election, he took the truly unprecedented step and tried to overturn the result, pressuring state officials to find votes, spreading lies about fraud, and encouraging supporters to storm the Capitol on January 6th and stop the transfer of power. This was a direct assault on one of America's core democratic institutions. A peaceful transition via a certified election. Historians have compared this moment to the tactics of emerging dictators. For example, the failed coup in January 6th has been likened to Hitler's beer hall putsch of 1923, an early failed coup attempt that signaled the potential for future violence if not forcefully repudiated. Indeed, experts warn that failure to hold Trump and his allies accountable for January 6th may parallel how Hitler faced only lighter consequences in 1923 and later returned stronger.
Since returning to the presidency in 2025, Trump has openly pursued an agenda to concentrate power in the executive and weaken independent institutions in line with his strong man instincts. Within weeks, he was, quote, consolidating executive power, undermining checks and balances, and challenging established legal norms, as one analyst noted in The Guardian. He has purged or intimidated officials in the Justice Department and FBI who were involved in investigating him, even threatening to publicly expose and punish individual agents. He installed loyalists in key security positions, and despite not being very well qualified, and urged Congress to grant him direct control over agencies traditionally insulated from politics, on purpose, by the way. In a symbolic flourish, Trump even posted an image of himself, dig this, wearing a king's crown with the words, "Long live the king," and approvingly quoted the dictum of Napoleon, quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law," unquote, implying that Trump considers his actions above the law when done in what he considers to be the name of national salvation. All these behaviors, cracking down on opposition, bypassing legal constraints, and claiming extra legal authority, are textbook moves for authoritarian regimes. Political experts have described the United States as sleepwalking into authoritarianism under these conditions, warning that many Americans have been desensitized or normalized to Trump's attacks on democratic processes. The risk, they argue, is that American democracy could gradually be hollowed out from within, just as happened in other countries where institutions yielded to an autocratic leader, such as Nazi Germany. Mobilization of loyal followers and tolerance of political violence is another one of these characteristics. Trump's political movement has been characterized by massive rallies, fervent crowds, and at times eruptions of political violence, all hallmarks of an authoritarian cult of personality. Much like Hitler and other fascist leaders staged grandiose rallies to whip up support, Trump's rallies have been theatrical, emotionally charged events that serve to solidify a cult-like loyalty among his base. Attendees often describe a sense of community and catharsis at these events. As one historian observed, a Trump rally creates a feeling of solidarity, a community of feeling, much as the Nazi rallies did. Individuals become part of a euphoric collective, losing some of their individuality and critical judgment as they all identify with the leader's cause. This intense personal loyalty to Trump has sometimes overridden institutional loyalty. For example, rioters on January 6th were even willing to attack police officers and lawmakers while waving Trump flags. The culmination of this mobilization was the January 6th insurrection, when Trump's followers, having been fed lies of a stolen election, heeded his call to fight like hell and violently breached the Capitol in an attempt to keep him in power. This event demonstrated the dangerous potential of an authoritarian-style mass movement in the United States, a leader persuading supporters to reject democratic outcomes and resort to extrajudicial force.
Equally troubling to observers is Trump's endorsement or excusal of violence committed in his name. Committed even before his presidency, he encouraged supporters at rallies to knock the crap out of protesters. And he even later spoke of possibly paying legal bills for those who got into fights on his behalf. After January 6th, rather than unequivocally repudiating the attackers, Trump told them, "We love you," in a video message, even as the attack was ongoing. He floated promises of pardons for them if he returned to office. In 2022 and 2023, he explicitly campaigned on granting clemency to the January 6 defendants, portraying them as martyrs. Once back in power, Trump made good on that promise, as discussed, by pardoning and freeing nearly all the rioters. This act of clemency for insurrectionists is virtually unheard of in democratic nations, and analysts have called it a sign of Trump's authoritarian mindset. He is using the tools of office to protect his loyal foot soldiers who carried out politically motivated violence. A former U.S. attorney described it as turning the pardon power on its head Instead of showing mercy to the repentance or promoting justice, Trump's pardons rewarded people who tried to ignite an insurrection. In authoritarian regimes, it is common for leaders to pardon security forces or militant supporters who commit abuses, reinforcing the idea that anything done in the service of the regime will simply be forgiven. Trump's actions mirror this pattern. The concern among democracy experts is that by absolving the January 6th offenders, Trump has normalized political violence and possibly paved the way for more. As a group of extremism scholars noted, such pardons emboldened violent groups. If far-right militias and zealots believe the president has their back, they may feel freer to engage in intimidation or violence in the future. This creates a chilling feedback loop, characteristics of authoritarian societies. Loyalists are unleashed as enforcers of the leader's agenda, while opponents are terrified into silence.
In summary, the current state of Trump's presidency as of June 2025 is unprecedented on multiple fronts. Trump's pardoning of the January 6th insurrectionists and the very notion that he might even consider pardoning himself underscore how far traditional norms have been bent. These actions cannot be viewed in isolation. They tie into a broader context in which Trump's political style shows strong parallels with authoritarian playbooks seen in history, as we've pointed out numerous times in this episode. From his use of propaganda and the big lie, a Hitlerian principle, to scapegoating minorities, undermining independent institutions, such as cutting off the freedom of the press, and encouraging cult-like loyalty, even to the point of condoning violence. Trump's behavior has evoked comparisons to the early tactics of Hitler and other authoritarian leaders. It's a playbook that we know well. Scholars of democracy have been issuing warnings, drawing lessons from how authoritarianism can gradually take hold. They point out that Hitler's rise in the 1930s was enabled by economic grievances, nationalist propaganda like Make Germany Great Again, attacks on truth, and the willingness of conservative elites to turn a blind eye. Dynamics that find unsettling echoes in the United States today.
None of these parallels suggest that America is destined to repeat the darkest chapters of the 20th century, but they do serve as a definite reminder that democratic institutions and the rule of law are not guaranteed, and they can be eroded from within if a leader with authoritarian tendencies is given free rein. The fact that mainstream commentators have been compelled to evoke Nazi Germany and discussing Trump is itself a measure of the gravity of the moment. As historian Timothy Snyder has argued, America is not immune to the forces that have undone other democracies, and vigilance is required to invent history's lessons from being learned the hard way. The coming months and years will test whether the United States constitutional checks and balances are robust enough to withstand these authoritarian pressures, or whether Trump's second term will push the country into a deeper democratic crisis. For now, the trajectory of Trump's rhetoric and actions continues to track with authoritarian patterns identified by experts. A reality that is alarming and galvanizing for those who publicly engage in discourse about the future of American democracy.
You know, I'm very certain that there will be some who will not like this content of this episode. However, the truth is the truth, and ignoring or hiding the truth does not really change the impact. It only makes people unprepared. For now, we will stop this episode. I beg you, please stay informed. Stand for democracy. Stand for the USA and all of those who have given everything to protect and defend her.
Goodbye for now, and may God bless and protect the USA.